For Whittaker versus DeRidder, the fight is easy to visualize but extremely difficult to simulate. This is because both guys carry very strong silhouettes, and by silhouette I mean that anyone familiar with them can easily picture their stance and style and pacing, but all of those things are so dynamically opposed, you can't really just throw them into, say, a UFC 5 CPU game and pick whoever won the best out of 10 as your official prediction. Whittaker is all of the things you think he is, right? Bouncing, patient, great timing, very in and out. And the same goes for RDR and his grappling and pressure. There are not a lot of unknowns in those areas, which means it's about how the already knowns collide. It's just that we've never really seen them in remotely similar matchups. For example, RDR has a propensity for countering pressure with intercepting knees. Whittaker often throws over mid-range knees with straight shots coming over the top, and RDR often collar ties around shots coming upwards. Whittaker and DeRidder both have enough tools in their toolkits where they can have an infinite stalemate. So, to first establish their tools and tendencies, and then work upwards from there, is most likely the way where you can get any sort of solid visualization of the fight. Every fight starts in open space, much to DeRidder's despair, but we'll start there regardless. Whittaker is an open space fighter by trade, who fences with a very bladed stance. Not necessarily in the same exact vein as somebody like Wonderboy, who would fence with his lead leg, whereas Whittaker is more somebody who fences with the space in between him and his opponent, with his game revolving around how he closes the distance. Because of his stance giving him a very centered weight distribution with both of his legs loaded, he's able to explode forwards or backwards with relative ease compared to a very upright stance with somebody like DeRidder. He will often give up ground to stay at a long range up until a certain point where he gets too close to the fence and starts to circle or throws back strikes. He usually initiates in exchanges with straight shots like jabs and straights, often while circling or using the strike to dart to another direction and continue circling from there. A signature move he throws is a leaping lead hook while blitzing in. This is done when his opponents draw their guards up frequently in effort to go around their guards. Relatively simple. He also throws calf kicks with both his lead leg and rear leg, usually while circling if he throws it with his lead leg, because the lack of power means it needs to be timed when an opponent can't just eat it and counter. For example, somebody like Arnold Allen is really good at circling and then throwing kicks with the lead leg. Same as Volkanovski, although occasionally you will see somebody sit down on their punches and just fire back. That's why when Whittaker does it, he has to do it when he's circling, or he has to do it at the end of a combination. Whittaker's game, and the main loop he wants to put his opponents in, is all around controlling the pace and then timing big moments. He feints very actively with his hands and his movements, pretending he's going to dart in or throw something big over and over again until he stops making those big defensive reactions, and then that's when he pings you. A lot of the looks he gives are with his shoulders, lurching in different directions in a way of measuring how a rear straight or lead hand would fare in different exchanges. When he plants, he lurches over super far, looking to use his rear hand like a jab, which is something you would see a lot in guys like Peyton Talbot or Conor McGregor, both fighters who have great reaction speed and use planting as a way to bait and counterfight. Leaning so far forward means you can do a pseudo tall man defense and have a ton of space to lean backwards as a defensive reaction while still planted and can throw right back with how loaded your back leg is. The small leans he does are a big part of his game, as he is always throwing with his head off the center line, sometimes dipping a lot more than you'd expect. On the note of reaction speed, Whittaker's is great. He fights with his hands very low, yet is rarely punished for it, always drawing them up in time to respond to shots aimed at his head. His game relies on his reactions, as he does his best work intercepting shots with his own strikes or with reactive takedowns. One way he maximizes this is through his stance. Fighting very long as well as fighting southpaw means most fights are open stance, giving him the most time to react as everything is being thrown at the farthest distance possible. One thing to note about his stance is that because his hands are always kept so low, he completely withdraws himself from the hand fighting game you usually see in open stance fights. This can be a great benefit to him in some matchups. He was able to frustrate Darren Till, who loves to hand fight and use his lead as a rangefinder, as well as throwing distractions up top to sneak in shots to the body. In fact, body shots are almost impossible to land against Whittaker out in the open space because of this. He did hand fight occasionally in that fight, but it was almost exclusively when he was coming in, and he did not give much time for Darren Till to find his range. With all the advantages he has in the open stance, it's only just that there is some sort of tactic that can be used against this style. Against an opponent fighting in southpaw, Whittaker does seem more hittable. The close stance seems to put more pop into his shots because he's less distance to cross and jabbing is much less awkward, but it also negates a portion of the all-in or all-out fight that he wants. Not hand fighting means he's not occupying the lead hand much at all, which makes it awkward for him to blitz in past defenses. This has gotten him caught before against Cannonier and Duplessis notably, who countered Rob's blitz by standing their bases and throwing with their lead hands before he can land on them. However, it takes a lot of intent to use the close stance against Whittaker effectively. Paulo Costa and Ikram Aliskerov were both unable to capitalize. Oi! Paulo Costa and Ikram Aliskerov both were unable to capitalize majorly on this stance issue, as it still comes down to the distance the fight is at. Even in a close stance, Whittaker loves a fencing match. Another downside to his style, and that's downside with big air quotes, is that he can get caught out of position, but it's all circumstance. Another downside to his style is that he can get caught out of position. He wants his opponents to respect his game and play along with the rules, so he either wants his opponents to be mobile and willing to retreat, or he wants them to shell up, biting on every feint. Where he struggles, like how I mentioned earlier with Southpaw, close stance committals from Duplessis and Cannonier, is when his opponents sit down on their punches through his strikes. Of course, it isn't that simple. It's very difficult to intercept someone who's a veteran of the intercepting game, and who is likely in a stance that makes him much faster than you. The close stance helps this a lot. It puts you both on equal footing, as you both can land from there, and anything one person throws can be responded to. Romero fought in the close stance for moments in their fight. It seemed like he had the idea of taking shots on the guard and throwing back, but he would still give up a lot of space to Whittaker, who would just circle and reset and hit his guard again for free. But one thing we can see in that fight is how Whittaker's kicks looked in that stance. He loves throwing stomps at the knee and thighs in an open stance, and it is a very safe thing to do, because even if you miss or your knee slides off in the worst way possible, you're still essentially in the same stance already. However, he still slams those same stomps against Yoel in a close stance, and as well as against Adesanya when he fought in a close stance. In this scenario, it is extremely risky, as you end up with your back facing the opponent and your legs so far apart that withdrawing is a complete mess. In fact, whenever Whittaker gets punished, it is most often from throwing something that puts him at a very awkward angle from his opponent. This is why sitting down on punches or making much smaller pivots rather than big motions is crucial against him. The way Whittaker was caught by Adesanya and the way Whittaker was caught by Romero both have positions in common. Whittaker throws rarely in combination, always a 1, a 2, a 1-2, or any of the three followed by a kick. Because of how far he explodes and leans, he's very frequently in an awkward position if the combination ever gets extended or the exchange is prolonged by a quick response, which is exactly how he was caught by Izzy. Of course, his takedowns and takedown defense need to be mentioned, as it comes up in all of his fights and absolutely will in this matchup. His takedowns in the open mat are great, super explosive reactive shots, and he disguises his proactive ones with convincing feints and shots upstairs. He goes for single legs against opponents with wide stances who give them his legs, and blasts doubles against just about everyone else, as his feints can often cause them to retreat their lead leg and become square again. His takedown defense is notoriously superb both on and off the fence, foreshadowing for some of his clinch behaviors. He goes for single legs against opponents with wide stances who give them his legs, and blasts doubles against just about everyone else, as his feints can often cause them to retreat their lead leg and become square again. His takedown defense is notoriously superb both on and off the fence, foreshadowing for some of his clinch behaviors. His takedown defense is notoriously superb both on and off the fence. A foreshadowing for some of his clinch behaviors is his anti-grappling behaviors. Rob will continuously chain together defensive strategies until something works, never settling for a stalemate. His hands being low helps him frame and get underhooks, which he takes advantage of by trying to shuck the initial grappling attack before it becomes a prolonged exchange. He limp legs out of single legs and sprawls doubles very well, and the sense of balance that comes with his veterancy with bladed movements lets him avoid trips very well as well. His takedown defense is notoriously superb both on and off the fence. A foreshadowing for some of his clinch behaviors is his anti-grappling behaviors. Rob will continuously chain together defensive strategies until something works, never settling for a stalemate. His hands being low helps him frame and get underhooks, which he takes advantage of by trying to shuck the initial grappling attack before it becomes a prolonged exchange. He limp legs out of single legs and sprawls doubles very well, and the sense of balance that comes with his veterancy with bladed movements lets him avoid trips very well as well. Though I am doing big write-ups, I'm not a technique cell who's going to shit on Reinier for bad form, according to some Kyokushin guidebook on front leg snap kicks. Everything I say is just my own interpretation, and I will only say something is bad if it's done in a way that just isn't working in the fights, as in low efficacy. RDR, fortunately, does not need as much of a write-up when it comes to breaking down his open space striking, because he hates it. It makes him incredibly uncomfortable. While it is a bit of an exaggeration, RDR is rarely desiring to be at a hittable range. He's either all the way out or all the way in, which is fun to compare to Whittaker. Whittaker moves in and out in big explosive movements, whereas DeRidder either lumbers forward or panics away. which is fitting for a jiu-jitsu player as this is essentially the Gracie red zone, green zone idea, which was coined by Hickson Gracie as saying that in a fight, a jiu-jitsu player either wants to be in a clinch distance or a mile away, with the space in the middle being the evil, demented striking range, which a Gracie family member may never play at. While in the red zone, Reinier throws jabs and teeps that have a very uncomfortable range to them, both because of his ridiculous frame and his stance. He will jab occasionally or teep occasionally as a way to occupy the opponent during his attempts to close the distance. Sometimes he will teep to keep the hands high before shooting low for a takedown. Very simple, very straightforward. When I say lumbering, I do not mean it lightly, though. He lurches so far forward, he is practically matching height with opponents several inches shorter than him. This gives him an even greater exaggeration of the tall man defense he already uses, and puts him that much closer to a takedown as he's leaning in that direction anyways. I would guess he was born early. He has a frame that maybe indicates an unnatural birth, and all of his grappling and striking motions tell me he yearns to be in the womb again and is desperate to recreate the fetal position in any way that won't sacrifice the outcome of the fight. The other big tools he uses in the striking are knees and collar ties. Though I did once see him punch and kick from the same side at the same time, I would hope this isn't a frequent tool he plans to return to. His knees are great, he can close a lot of distance and crash into the clinch from a good range away, and because of his height, it doesn't seem to be a great off-balancing effort for him. However, I have seen him throw knees while retreating, and it looked very ugly, as retreating knees often do, even conceptually. Though the knees are by far his best strike, his teeps and jabs simply do not have that kind of stank on them required to be a threat. He often double jabs with heavy asterisks and finger quotes because the doubling is just him flicking his wrist in his opponent's face a second or maybe even, if rarely, a third time. His striking game is 80% obfuscation and 20% janky tall man pop. His punches have a 2% crit chance and a 50% tickle chance. He'll throw these pitter-patter punches that just eventually land right after the 10th attempt and get very strong reactions. It's not terrifying power, but it feels at times hard to predict which strikes will have a sting and which could be brushed off entirely. When he throws like he's trying to hurt someone, he'll dip his head very predictably and wing them like how Strickland throws when he's trying to hurt someone. Sort of a, arms bent over, awkward, throwing overhands as if you just only had heard of an overhand before. His collar ties are terrifying and odd. He braves strikes coming at him and tries to time his opponents looking to hit him by wrapping his huge paws around the backs of their heads. He's gotten away with this a lot, and at some point I probably will have to acknowledge that he can at least kind of reactively recognize if a strike is coming at him and whether or not it can be responded to with a collar tie. All of these tools, however, are rarely used, if ever used, with any kind of setup whatsoever. While the non-committal ones don't get punished too egregiously, anything that manipulates his stance, like the naked kicks and knees he throws, absolutely wrecks his positioning and does get him caught. His hands are also nowhere to be seen when needed most. He will throw a lunging knee with his hands at his sides for some sort of cosmetic effect. However, in fights where he doesn't feel safe on the feet, he shoots even more immediately than he already does. Which isn't to say that the striking defense is entirely negligible, as what will happen when somebody defends a takedown. Other than stray head kicks and leg kicks, that's kind of it for his striking. His takedowns are awkward but effective. It's very funny seeing someone 6'4" dropping below the knees of someone half his size so he can shoot a double on them, but it's been working for him. It's very tricky though, because everyone he has taken down in the UFC has wanted to go to the ground with him. GM3 and Holland do not defend takedowns. That is not a thing they do. And Bo Nickel was not really taken down. It was instead a reversal off of a missed submission that Bo attempted and lost position over. In his one championship career, DeRidder did not in any of his wins fight someone of measurable wrestling talent. I actually watched several of Ongla and Song's fights throughout his career, and he's getting taken down with ease constantly. This is a career-long grappling deficiency, and DeRidder went 5 rounds with him. Not to spoil the grappling conversation, but it is worth mentioning even in the takedown department. While RDR's takedowns are almost always finished against the cage, we can still talk about his shots from open space before we move on. His arms, if I haven't said this before, were stolen from the wacky waving inflatable tube man in front of a used car shop. Even on his worst shots possible, where his takedown is reacted to immediately, he is still getting his arms locked and locked deep. Every takedown is deep, and therefore needs to be defended as if it were already half completed. He does love single legs. He sort of just picks them up and runs the opponent to the fence. They do sometimes get stuffed with relatively minimal resistance, though, as he doesn't have a lot of options if he can't convince his opponent to run the cage or fall over. He's not really turning the pipe with any sort of grace. Like a lot of his clinch work and grappling, his takedowns use big dragging motions accelerated by his frame to really make his opponent carry his weight and sag to the ground, a la Tyson Fury. If he isn't running a single to the fence, he will swing the leg around to unbalance the opponent, but only ever so frequently. I've also seen him go for outside trips from the clinch position that have worked nicely for him. He is sort of forced to commit because of his proportions. His torso and chest are so comically large that if he leans over far enough to threaten an outside trip, he is going to do an outside trip, whether he likes it or not. To finish off with open space, wow, I should talk about his striking defense. He uses the collar tie and knees as a deterrent so people don't commit to big shots on him. But like I said regarding his knees earlier, his hands are never there to protect him. I've watched a lot of his fights in the build-up, and if he's in range to get hit, he usually gets hit. He turns away from strikes in a way that has and will get him punished. You need to see the strike coming. You really do not want to get hit by a heavy shot you can't see. And when he sees something coming, he very often turns his head away so much that I worry about what if some of them did connect. His frame naturally helps him evade some of these big looping shots, though, after they get through a maze of forearm and shoulder and elbow, but straight shots land on him, and they land a lot. I should probably also start the grappling and cage work with RDR. This is obviously his wheelhouse. In the clinch, he does so well with his frame. His over-unders look like Mobius strips, his whizzer looks very strong, and his overhooks are very exaggerated. He likes to lean on his opponent in the clinch and sag on them like with his wrestling, and threatens trips and unbalances with those grips. When his opponent is on the fence, he will immediately try and shoot a double. He dives for them so hard. He's been doing very well with getting them so far in his career, but he hasn't really fought anyone of anti-grappling note, so like always, it's hard to measure. One thing you can immediately see about his takedown against the fence is that how weird his posture is. Wrestlers usually like to keep their spine aligned for strength, but DeRidder is so hunched over it looks like a deadlift gone wrong. This is probably why he needs the help of the fence to finish his shots in the first place. He doesn't very frequently hit the whizzer kicks that he does try, but he mixes them up in between knees and punches, which I think is very overwhelming and helps amplify his sagging and breaking down style. His clinch striking has been really present in his UFC appearances, but not so much in one. In one championship, he would mostly just attempt takedown after takedown, with little knees in between whenever there was space. But in his UFC fights, he's been a lot more aggressive and deliberate with his strikes. He was constantly throwing these little punches in the clinch against Bo Nickel that didn't seem like they had crazy power on them, but they did to some effect, must have had some effect. As Bo seemed so uncomfortable by the bodywork, it completely changed his expression after the first round. He also constantly throws knees, whether he has the space to or not. It really seems like you do not want to be in those clinch positions for any extended amount of time with DeRidder because his entire game revolves around bullying you until you'd rather go to the ground with him. His sub attempts in the clinch are more threats than anything because of his height, and again, his arms are really, really long. He can reach for darces and guillotines with relative ease, but he's not very frequently finishing them in the standing position. DeRidder in the clinch has done some things that feel counterproductive, though. He'll hold onto a Kimura grip for a really long time and let his opponent breathe for too long. He doesn't have many effective trips or throws when the opponent is standing up, and sometimes he has to break away from the clinch to try and reshoot a takedown. Reinier also gets stuck when his arms are well tied up. In his fight with Leandro Ateides, I never looked up how to pronounce this, big Brazilian guy, Nova Unia. He really struggled to figure out what to do when his wrists were constantly being held in place. RDR does manage to keep the clinch for a long time. He always reverses the position eventually and has never been held against the fence against his will for a round. In the grappling, his main loop is pretty straightforward with a lot of reach ridiculousness. He loves top half guard in any position he can grapevine with, including mount. He gets really tight and crushes the opponent with his chest and grapevine so hard, and then postures up so they use the breath of fresh air to get up and then end up finding themselves in a darce. His chest having that unnatural protrusion probably helps a lot at smothering, and I'm sure he's unbearable to roll with. Because of his arms, he can get one arm into a darce position from just about anywhere, which means he's a permanent threat as long as his hands are anywhere near your face. His ground and pound is pretty legit with good mixture of strikes to the head and body. He's very confident in his submission defense, so he will let himself get caught in something to advance position. When he ends up on bottom, he usually works his way back up, but he has paid the price in sacrificing control time with missed submissions that can get taken advantage of by a safer grappler. He does cool inversions and does open his guard up trying to find something that will let him get it back up, which is a good mentality. He's had a closed guard and then fully opened it only to invert and sort of try to fish for triangles and things like that. But in reality, what he's doing is just looking to get a leg on your hip so he can kick back up and stand back up and take you down. He can slither from arm triangles to back takes to full mount with small movements because of his reach. It's a real weapon and super difficult to overcome. He's not much of a joint lock threat. He's teased Kimuras, but rarely attempts leg locks, which makes sense because he started in judo and doing BJJ gyms in the Netherlands. And every grappler from those regions is very old school in their grappling, a la Gunnar Nelson, and you're more likely to see a wrist lock than an ankle lock. Whittaker's grappling is very old school as well. He trains in the gi a lot, which encourages a lot of stagnant holds and grips, similar to how safe he works in the clinch. Not a lot of crazy scrambles or sub-attempts, just safely working back to his feet and timing his explosive movements. We don't see a lot of his ground game in fights, but I have watched his gi matches and his ADCC trials competition for some of this information, but all with a grain of salt, given that in reality he'd probably just want to punch these people in the face. Whittaker's clinch game is pretty traditional for MMA. He doesn't usually want to be in the clinch, but if he's hurt, he will do everything he can to stay on his feet instead of sacrificing any control time. He goes for throws with a bit more force, which causes big unbalances that he can capitalize on with nice knees. He doesn't throw in the clinch anywhere near as actively as DeRidder, but his shots are timed very nicely. He doesn't punch much in the clinch, but he will throw big elbows and even side kicks and body kicks in tight spaces on the fence. When grappling on the clinch offensively, he uses his strong legs to really drive his opponent onto the fence, but he makes sort of a mistake here. A lot of people get square as to pin the opponent against the cage, like in grappling when you're in top position, but because of how the cage bends, it actually ends up giving the opponent space to slip out. He ties up very well, though, and makes it very hard for his opponent to land on him in the clinch. His cage work and anti-grappling are great. He has such a strong base, he can split his legs against a double and keep great strength. He does hunch over a lot and let his opponent get height on him in grappling exchanges, but even from a turtle, he can explode up very well. One thing that confuses me, though, is how often he wraps his head around his opponent's head in the clinch, not like a collar tie, but instead more like an overhook, where he's getting his arm as deep as it can go, like around the opponent's neck. It might give him a strong frame where he can escape the clinch, but it seems like it's also just easily giving the back to his opponent, or at least eventually when he faces an opponent that will take advantage of something like that. Now, to get on to things that are more intangible or miscellaneous, there is a lot to cover. For example, Reinier has cardio that seems weird at first glance, but it does sort of make sense when you look at certain fights, especially against Anatoly Malkin. He gasses from striking exchanges pretty quickly, but he can grapple for 5 rounds like a champ. I think this is partly because of normal MMA fighter with a specific background sort of thing, like how Cody Garbrandt gets gassed after a round of wrestling, but can go 5 rounds evading and throwing hard shots. Reinier does have decades of grappling experience over his MMA experience, but I also think that it's because he needs confidence. He only has one game, and the discomfort he feels on the feet, I believe, wears on him mentally. He gets very, very desperate after being on the feet or in bottom position and will get back up only to seconds later try a trip or front choke that he slips and falls over again with. Against Malkin, there was very little action to cause that much fatigue, but failing takedowns was exhausting for him, even if he wasn't committing as strongly as, say, somebody like Kamaru Usman, who may eventually tire a little from takedowns. He commits a lot to his shots, though, sort of like the opposite of Merab. However, when he gets hit, his chin really holds up, but his defensive reactions are just catastrophic. Especially when gassed, he shells up and will blindly reach for collar ties. He backs up to the fence a lot for someone who's so pressuring normally. It seems not very helpful for his game. He doesn't circle or pivot and try to take advantage of how close they are to the fence. He just backs straight up. It doesn't really seem like he has great... Despite his exaggerated reactions when he gets hit and when he's fatigued, it does not seem like his chin has any wear on it whatsoever. Even against Malkin was landing very hard shots, and DeRidder seemed to only slow down, like, just from regular fatigue. And when he gave up in the fight, it didn't seem like he was concussed. He was moving fine, or at least relatively fine for somebody who's fatigued. He just sort of surrendered. It's also worth noting that, like I mentioned before, with DeRidder's UFC run sort of having these good stylistic matchups, all these guys that he was against were also smaller and weaker and very, very willing to grapple with him. Whittaker, on the other hand, got his fucking teeth caved in, or gradually caved in, across his last few fights. In recent interviews, he's been flashing the teeth from his surgery. Maybe it's out of left field to say that I don't trust it, but it's really hard to. Something not everyone knows is that Rob already lost most of his teeth from an injury as early as his UFC career that he talked about back in Tough. So it's not like he's entirely new to getting implants or recovering after an oral surgery. He's been able to come back from numerous surgeries, in fact, and win the fights going forward from them. But given that it was an abscess deep into the gums of his mouth, it does make you wonder how it would look if he got put into another chokehold or took a straight shot in the mouth. RDR walks around at 220 pounds, at least. He was 215 just a day ago cutting for his fight, according to an interview he did with Demetrius Johnson. He's going to be huge in this fight. He's been huge in one championship, but allegedly he's walking around 10 pounds heavier than he used to back then, and he was always bigger than his opponents. Another thing I noticed from that interview is that RDR is getting pretty banged up in training. He's got bruising on his face, and he said he's sore all over. Well, I don't really think this is something worth mentioning normally. The asterisk is probably his activity. It's big weight cut after big weight cut against continuously rising levels of competition. It's frequently said that skills are gained out of camp, and that camp is just for dialing on specifics. So it's worth asking if the RDR that beat GM3 is beating Whittaker, and if he's making the necessary adjustments in a year. Both guys, from their interviews, seem pretty aware of the matchups. Both guys seem smart and confident and pretty clear on what the game plan is going to be, what the fight might end up looking like. One thing I thought was interesting was how much Whittaker was willing to compliment DeRidder's skills, even in the striking. He said, but didn't really elaborate on. When he was in the build-up for Duplessis, and even after the Duplessis fight, he was more or less reluctant to give serious credit to any technique that Dricus had. And frankly, I think Dricus was probably much more technical on the feet than DeRidder ever was, or probably ever will be. Frame is everything for this fight. Rob has fought guys his size his entire career except for Izzy. In all of his UFC fights, other than Adesanya, his opponents have been within an inch of his height, which is ideal for his style. I think he struggles a lot trying to close the distance and measuring range against long frames. In his second fight with Izzy, he fought a very slow pace with his jabs just barely landing at full extension. He wasn't really able to follow up because of how far extended his body already was. I think the reason he got dropped in round one was because of his misjudging the distance more than anything, and he did adapt later on. It just took time. Matchup-wise, I think they're both nightmare matchups for each other. The fight just seems so one-sided stylistically for both guys. RDR's reach is terrifying to overcome for Rob. He really doesn't want to overextend into a knee or reactive collar tie situation. And, especially given his stance and given the way he moves, if he overextends, it's going to be such an awkward movement where it'd be really easy for RDR to reactively just latch onto him from any angle. However, I do think RDR will really not enjoy slugging through Rob's speed and trying to predict what shot is coming next. I don't think it's going to be easy for him to try to reactively time a knee or reactively collar tie at anything. Even in the grappling, Rob is the second physically strongest person Reinier has fought, and the first place guy beat him twice. Rob's tie-ups would be frustrating to get through, and his base is incredible. He's very rarely off-balanced in the grappling and always lands on his knees. It does seem like trips probably wouldn't be very effective on him. However, he gets very low, fighting from split legs and turtles, and from those positions, it's hard to imagine that RDR wouldn't just sit on him like the giant he is. Rob is not someone of fragile confidence whatsoever. Sometimes we naturally get that impression of chinny guys, but that does not apply to Whittaker. Even after getting mauled for a minute by DDP, he came back the next round landing combinations and being aggressive. Whittaker has also had a habit of wrestling up against everyone he fights, though. This is something I didn't mention in the grappling, as I was sort of waiting to for this moment. He wasn't afraid to shoot on Romero, and when he was hurt, he was panic shooting a lot on Romero. There's something to worry about when you have to ask if he's going to wrestle up into the front headlock position as DeRidder slips into Darce's like it were second nature. While I think Whittaker can hold his own in the clinch, there was concern that his tendencies to throw kicks in close distance could be capitalized on, as well as his overhooks around the head. But overall, it's so hard to not just pick Whittaker. There's a lot of fights where you can go, oh, if only this guy was like 5 years younger, I'd pick him 100% of the time. Well, there are, I guess, worries about if Whittaker's fading in this way or that way. Given that he is 35 now, I believe, I just don't think it's something to be concerned about. I think, no, 34. They're both 34. But yeah, he's old, but not really. He's taken a lot of damage, though, in his career. And you do have to wonder, like, at one point, will he start fading? What if this is the fight? But you can't predict fights off of that. There just isn't a lot of external information that would tell us that this is the fight. He was wrestling up a grade against Hamzat, who we can only pray is much stronger than Reinier DeRidder, given how many people Hamzat was able to physically bully in ways that DeRidder has never physically bullied anyone. It would be a freakish performance if DeRidder could truly dominate Whittaker, even in the grappling, just given Whittaker's physicality. It's just scary, though, because of the height. As simple as that is, the frame is something that Whittaker has only really had to train for once or twice, and it's with Adesanya. And while Adesanya has great takedown defense and great striking and whatnot, it's managing the height requires making really big motions and making really big motions to close the distance. And therefore, it sort of is doing a lot of DeRidder's work for him. And the other thing, again, is the wrestling up and like getting darced or whatever. Against DDP, if you remember, after he got taken down in open space, he ended up wrestling into a darce really, really quickly. It's scary. It's really hard to confidently pick anybody, but realistically, it's DeRidder wins round 1 or 2. If he's going to win the fight, he's winning in round 1 or 2. Whereas I think Whittaker could win in any round, and I think if the fight gets past the second, he likely will keep winning rounds. So yeah, realistically, Robert Whittaker wins. For these other fights, I didn't do write ups. I'm just going to freestyle them all right now. Petr Yan versus Marcus McGhee is a funny matchup because Marcus McGhee has had like 3 UFC fights, and yet he's 3 years older than Petr Yan, who is a former champion. It's kind of crazy how young Petr Yan is. I think this fight is scary in a few ways, but realistically, this is a fight that Yan usually wins. It's Marcus McGhee's relatively low output that I think is the issue. He will very often land these super hard shots that off balance his opponent and frustrate them and keep them at bay so that he doesn't have to continue landing really hard. He does throw in combination occasionally, and he did look great throwing combinations against Jonathan Martinez, but it's hard to sort of imagine that he will be consistently landing combinations on Petr Yan. And if he does choose to fight a game where he's landing single shots, I think Yan is defensively composed enough to be able to take those shots and fire back strong. Again, with the wrestling, I think this is also something where Yan is probably just going to be better than him. There's something to be said maybe about the MMA Lab team having already had to train for Petr Yan before with Sean O'Malley, but we've also seen gyms fail and fail and fail to beat the same person before. So realistically, it's Petr Yan. Getting to Sharputin Magomedov versus Marc-Andre Barriault is, I hate to say this, but a sort of a stark drop in quality that isn't maintained throughout the whole card, but it does sort of make you think about manufactured aura, I guess, or manufactured personalities in the sport. UFC Fight Night Whittaker versus DeRidder is being touted as an incredibly stacked card, standing alone amongst an ocean of Apex cards and Amir Al-Bazi main events. But why is that really, right? Why does it seem like the UFC is holding good fighters and good fights on standby for events held in the Middle East? Most of you already know that this is happening. It's being casually referenced by YouTubers and more aggressively referenced by journalists. But does anyone actually say why? It's being said that oil princes are super fans of the sport, which I don't disagree with. But how is there a Saudi billionaire super fan for MMA and boxing and a Saudi super billionaire fan, mega fan, super fan for esports tournaments? Even when you go to the Saudi government website for their 2030 goals, national gaming and esports strategy is listed before any of the combat sports they seem already so invested in. And this isn't to mention their hand in Formula One, their bid to host the FIFA World Cup, or their huge investments into entertainment like with WWE, or building entire entertainment districts with billions of dollars. Well, we'll get to that. I do also want to get to the Shara Magomedov thing a little bit. You don't like Sharputin Magomedov if you're a super fan of the sport. I just refuse to believe that. Not only is he just like a douchebag as a human being, but he's also kind of such an obvious one-trick pony that it just doesn't even feel fun to watch, because his fights are going to be match made in a way that is entirely rigged against him. Sand-picked matchmaking, as I geniusly said about 3 days ago in an Instagram group chat. But yeah, that's what has to make you think. That's what has to make you sort of cycle these thoughts into your head, and hopefully you open the washing machine in your head and you pull out these wonderfully clean ideas that say something along the lines of, I don't think the rich billionaire guys really like the sport that much. I think the real reason they're doing this is because they're poor. Not yet, though. Right now, they're probably trillionaires, because why wouldn't they hide their wealth? But the entire fortune of the Saudi royal family is reliant on a finite resource that is disappearing fast. They're burning through oil, and they will run out. They are poor eventually. They're essentially like poor guaranteed. It's called the poverty curse, I believe. So one of their many strategies to diversify their income is to become the sports and entertainment hub of the world, buying up teams and players and negotiating contracts with everyone. Even the bloated carcass of the PFL is selling minority stake to Saudi sports investment funds and running shows in Riyadh. All of these funds and Saudi billionaires and princes and whatnot are all acting in the interest of the country. And the UFC, or more specifically TKO, which is both the UFC and WWE, is making deals with a country that is completely apathetic to their cause, which is fine. It's business at the end of the day, but it's just funny how all these things are being presented as if Turki Al-Sheikh is like just the hugest boxing fan. Turki Al-Sheikh likes killing people. I'm just gonna say that. Like, I maybe that's crazy, but I'm gonna say that Turkey Al-Sheikh probably likes killing people. The UFC is making deals with a country with an astronomically high rate of human rights violations relative to its GDP. This is not like to your benefit. We talked about this with Shara Putin being the feature fight on the main card. The facts are completely in opposition to what stupid people will tell you. We are not getting better cards. We're not getting a better future for the sport. Saudis are paying $40 million per fight night hosted in their territories, and we are still getting Amir Albazi fighting the next week. We are still getting fan favorites fighting in the UFC Apex in front of the fat people that are friends with Dana White. But all of this has strong relevance to the cards because even the matchmaking, again, being fondled by these sandy hands. There's absolutely no better example than Shara Magomedov. He's 4-1 in his last 5. In the feature fight against 3-2 in his last 5, Marc-Andre Barriault. Of Shara's 4 wins, 3 had been finished in their last fights, and the one is Antonio Tricoli, who will likely be finished in every single one of his UFC appearances. And it should as well be mentioned that Tricoli was a short-nosed replacement for another short-nosed replacement for Ihor Petr, who had also been finished in the bout prior to his scheduled match with Shara Magomedov. And while Barriault is a step up from the 4-fight slop streak that Magomedov squeaked through the first time, it is clear that matchmakers are hyper-aware that Barriault has looked extremely vulnerable in his last few performances. Regardless, to go in depth on this fight would be a waste of time because it is either going to be a Shara Magomedov slot fight where he does little funny toe touch kicks, like it's a Taekwondo like ITF tournament or whatever, or Barriault is going to hold him against the cage and then elbow him and knee him for 3 rounds. And I'm leaning towards Barriault because getting to the clinch is really fucking easy in this sport. It happens in every fight. It's really hard to think that it's that difficult. It's hard to think that Shara Magomedov is even that much of a threat on the feet, given that he isn't putting out so many of these other guys that are getting put out all of the time. It took Shara to the 3rd round to fight Antonio Tricoli, and that was when he was using his hands. He's very not dangerous whatsoever with his kicks. He really isn't. I don't know how many kick finishes he has in the UFC. I'm going to guess it's 1 or it's 0. I'm actually going to say right now. What? Petrosian, nope. Oleksiejczyk, nope. Tricoli, nope. Bruno Silva, no. It's just with his hands, his 2 finishes. And if he's getting into the boxing range with Barriault, I would pray that Barriault just beats the fuck out of him. That's that fight. Almabaev versus Jose Ochoa is... I want to say it would be unserious to make a serious prediction, just given how little we know about Jose Ochoa. Given that most people are watching only Jose Ochoa's 2 UFC appearances, it's just going to be really difficult to make big assumptions about how his fight versus Asi will look. I will say, though, I don't think Asi's striking is good. I think his threat is entirely in the grappling, and the spinning wheel kicks are stupid. His grappling's cool. He looks very strong against some guys. I think Kopp is kind of just like an athletic freak in some ways, and so he probably deals with wrestlers pretty well. But Jose Ochoa is completely fearless. He's got a big old chin, and I seem to remember that his cardio is really good. So I think there's a really good chance he wins this. It's only 3 rounds, which I guess kind of favors both guys in a way, right? It means Asi only has to hold him for 3 rounds, but it also means that Jose is able to spend more of his energy to, try and land big shots in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Or that Jose Ochoa only needs to land 3 or 4 big shots to win those rounds. So yeah, I want Jose Ochoa to win. I guess based off information, maybe we'll also pick Jose Ochoa to win because I guess we've just seen more of Asi Almabaev's flaws or whatever. He did kind of quit against Metal Cap, which, yeah, I mean, it's Cap, but still, Jose Ochoa makes people quit. And you know what? I think Leonard Kavanagh is awesome. I want to believe he's the best wrestler in the division, even though that doesn't make any sense. So why wouldn't he be better than Almabaev? All right, Krylov, Guskov. I wanted to do way more tape study than I did on this fight. In fact, I'm going to really quickly Google Bogdan Guskov UFC fight free. Watch this. Hold on. Bogdan. My throat is it's fucking killing me. I've been talking so much. I had to re-record this entire thing so many times. Okay, the Bogdan Guskov highlight is him throwing elbows in the clinch. Oh, he's really accurate. That is one thing I've noticed about him. He's even in these fast moments when people are like dipping their heads a lot, he seems to have a good idea of when to commit to shots versus when to sort of like abandon a strike, so that way his momentum isn't like fucked up and his like body isn't entirely out of position. Um, he has been caught doing stupid shit before, like a few times, even in fights he won. So it's really hard to pick him against Krylov. But Krylov also gets caught doing stupid shit. So maybe this is just a fight where you pick the younger guy who also has way less of a fucking asterisk in the fact that Nikita Krylov abandoned his home country of Ukraine to like live in Russia and carry the Russian flag. I have no idea what that means. I don't know any of the implications holy of that. I don't even know what gym he trains at. I'm looking it up right now. It's YK promotion. Like, I don't know. It seems like this guy might be a little all over the place in his life. And he's got knocked the fuck out. So Guskov, it's also worth mentioning here that almost all of these Eurasian Russian area fighters are probably all going through weird circumstances right now, except for the ones in the Khabib Nurmagomedov camps because they're all just rich as fuck and avoiding anything. But like every other day, you're seeing online that like some random MMA fighter, even oh god, Timur Kizraev, like 18-0 guy who just beat Brendan Loughnane and like won the PFL $1 million tournament, is still getting involved in like Russian like gang shit and whatnot. It's pretty crazy. And among Krylov's weird uh, country ship swapping, it's really hard to get a good idea of where some of these fighters are at, except for the ones that have just moved to the US or other countries. Boop. For example, in the next fight, Said Nurmagomedov versus Bryce Mitchell, I have no idea what gym Said trains out of. Oh, it's Dag Fighter in Dagestan. But they seem to have a lot of pretty good names in there. But then again, it's still in Dagestan. It's still in this country that is sort of surrounded by war and whatnot. So it's really hard to know like how's Said Nurmagomedov's life going right now. Not sure. I mean, he's not like fighting that frequently, so and he's not like withdrawing like with publicly stated injuries or anything. So it seems like I mean he's at least financially doing okay enough to like pull out of fights all the time and whatnot. Um, Regardless, against Bryce Mitchell, I mean Bryce Mitchell also has his own asterisks. Like for a guy that doesn't have a camp, and I'm not sure if he has a dietitian, moving down to 135 is like kind of a scary prospect. What if he is not doing things the right way? What if he's carrying more body fat than he should or less body fat than he should? What if he's just simply eating less and not like changing his diet whatsoever, or like changing his macros or whatnot or his training routines? What if he's doing everything exactly the same but just eating less? And what if he ends up because of that like feeling a lot weaker in the cage and maybe not being as fast, maybe feeling like he's fatiguing a bit quicker? There are sort of, in my eyes, a lot of asterisks for something like that for somebody like Bryce Mitchell, unfortunately. He has 4 training partners at his gym, allegedly, according to the Barada MMA page on Topology. But I don't believe that because I'm pretty sure TJ Brown is a big training partner of his, and he's not on there. Regardless, Bryce Mitchell is in a weird spot in his career. All the guys he's lost to are pretty good. That's the thing that everybody says, right? Bryce Mitchell lost to Ilia Topuria. That's his first official MMA loss. That's or his professional MMA loss. That's not too bad, right? I mean, at least going to the second round with Ilia is better than some people are doing. And then losing to Jean Silva. John Silva's really good. A lot of people think he's championship material. But what about Josh Emmett? I mean, Emmett's not bad, but he's not like beating everybody. He had a split loss to Des Green. But again, I mean, even Josh Emmett's losses aren't really that bad. Lerone Murphy, Ilia Topuria, Yair Rodriguez. But what about the fact that Bryce Mitchell lost to Brad Katona? People don't seem to remember this. Brad Katona is now a bantamweight, and it's not like he fared much better there than he did featherweight against Bryce. It just leaves a lot of questions. There are still a lot of questions to be had. In his
fight against Jean Silva, it seemed like he was taking a very kick heavy approach. Jean Silva has a very heavy stance, right? So that makes a lot of sense. But Saeed doesn't have a heavy stance. Saeed probably checks kicks fucking great because of just how light his stance is, how fluid he is, and how much he moves on the feet. So how does Bryce approach the striking against somebody like Saeed? It's it's hard to say. It seems like ideally he takes this like the Edson Barboza fight, except Barboza has like negative grappling threat. I don't know how many submissions Barboza has in the UFC. It's one actually out of Jesus 20 something UFC fights, and not that he needs submissions or anything. He's clearly doing fucking great on his own, but it's just something to say that Bryce doesn't actually fight submission threats except for John Silva, who he got submitted by, Kron Gracie, who is Kron Gracie, and Ilya Taporia, who submitted him. Right? And then you look at his other UFC fights. Edson Barboza, no submission threat. Andre Fili, no. Charles Rosa, no. Matt Sales, no. Tyler Diamond, no. He's sort of stylistically beating guys that are only going to anti-wrestle him, and that is great for somebody who wrestles and does jiu-jitsu. Saeed also wrestles and knows jiu-jitsu. And Bryce's shots are not sloppy, but like he will get a little desperate and he will shoot from a bit of a distance out and maybe not disguise them perfectly. He just gets really deep on them. And maybe you don't want to get really deep onto a shot against a guy who's a great front headlock choke. Honestly, in reality, I think I'd pick Saeed to win by front headlock choke 4 out of 10 times, which is a lot of times. And I only need him to win one more time via a thing that isn't a front headlock for it to be a 50-50 fight in my eyes. I'm not saying he wins in any other way other than a front headlock choke, but theoretically, right? It's only 1 out of 10 chance he does anything else and wins. I get that a lot of people are picking Bryce. I think Bryce is now a favorite in this fight, and he was an underdog, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of people have been relatively high on Bryce, but I don't know. I don't know. It's really fucking hard to trust somebody like him. He's weird. He's a weird guy in a weird spot in his life. And Nurmagomedov beats up a lot of people. I guess getting wrestled by Jonathan Martinez and getting wrestled by Hani Barcelos isn't like the greatest sign, but I think Sadyakub Kakramanov is like the best grappler he's ever fought, and he beat him. It's so fluky. And Bryce Mitchell hasn't really fought anybody super fluky. He's only fought like these really standard guys. So what if he gets fluked? I say he gets fluked. Muslim, I can't say it like that. Muslim Salikhov. No, Muslim Salikhov versus Carlos Leal is stupid. It's a stupid fight. I don't really want to talk about it. I don't even understand Muslim Salikhov's game anymore at this point. He kind of just pretends to jab a lot of the time, and then there's a spinning wheel kick, and it works. And Carlos Leal gets hit a lot, and he doesn't fight with his hands up. But the problem is, if he doesn't respect Muslim Salikhov's feints, then I think he probably finishes Muslim Salikhov on the feet. He just like sort of walks through the invisible, the invisible man that is Muslim Salikhov, and dodges all of his invisible jabs, and just walks into him and puts him against the fence and murders him. Takes his head straight off his shoulders. Really brutal. He's old, and we should protect Muslim Salikhov, but we're not doing that. But if Carlos Leal does bite feints, and he has fought wacky strikers like Sadabusi, and I guess lost to him both times, but it wasn't. They were decisions, you know. And Sadabusi's probably better. Whoa, his nickname's the Swedish Denzel Washington. Did you guys know that? That's fucking awesome. Oh no, Sadabusi worse? Oh no, he might be worse. No, he's better. No, he might be worse. No, he had a draw to Ray Cooper the third, dude. No, he's fucking terrible. No, Muslim Salikhov wins this fight. All right. Damon Blackshear, Dave Grant. Damon Blackshear is sporadic. I think he has something that is undiagnosed that has to do with like a hyperactive disorder. And Davey Grant is deeply autistic. I really think this. I've never seen an interview of him, but I just have a really strong feeling he's deeply autistic. Not in a I don't know, like sort of a modern American like neo autism where they have like they're really into like fandoms and internet culture. I think Davey Grant's like old school British, uh, has to put on pajamas at 9 o'clock every night, loves his train set, kind of autistic. I'm not really sure how this fares in their matchup, either the hyperactiveness or the autisticness. That's just my first takeaways when I think of them. Um, I don't know. I think Damon Blackshear striking is really, really fucking overrated. I don't know why I've heard people say good things about his striking. It doesn't look good to me at all, actually. It looks it looks like if you can conceptualize the fact that Martin Buday could throw a spinning back kick on a heavy bag, like Damon Blackshear will look good outstriking Alatang Haley, Alatang. Stupid fucking name. Um, but Alatang is barely getting past Chad and Helliger and fat retarded Clayton. I can't fuck. It's whatever. Fat retarded Clayton Rodriguez. I used to love you, Clayton Rodriguez. Anyways, Jamal Blackshear likely wins. I'm picking Davey Grant though out of spite because I want him to be old and continue winning. Amanda Ribas, Tabatha, Ricci. I don't know, man. Ribas fought Rose, I guess, and it was kind of close. And Tabatha Ricci, I haven't seen her fucking fight, like except for Angela Hill. And all of her wins, people say she doesn't deserve. So I'll probably just pick Amanda Ribas. Ibo Aslan, Billy Elekana. Ibo Aslan is really bad. He's really bad. I think Anton Turkalj might have actually been winning the first 2 rounds in the rematch. After already listening to him once, doesn't seem like he really has any kind of grappling. Even his win against Rafael Cerqueira is really bad, and he wasn't even finishing him against the fence as well as fucking Modestas Bakauskas. And Ibo Aslan, when you look at his build, that should be his whole thing, is like knocking heads off. So, Billy Alakana might just poke at him a little bit, and then Evo makes a big swing, and then Billy Alakana gracefully slides underneath his arm and slithers around his back, and fucking kills him. He kills Evo Aslan. He rips his spine out between his big meatball shoulder blades. Billy Alakana by Mortal Kombat finish. Yaya versus Steven. I'm picking Steven. Martin Buday versus Marcus Buchecha. Buchecha is not his last name. Buchecha means chubby cheeks. Did you guys know that? I know every Instagram post is going to be saying that Buchecha means chubby cheeks right now. So I'm going to say it right now. And then if this is the 10th time you've heard it, you have to pretend that it isn't and that this is the first time you've ever heard that. I don't really have a lot to say on this fight because I think Martin Buday is probably going to poke him with jabs that are really slow and fat until Marcus Buchecha gets angry enough to just shoot a takedown and actually commit to it. And I think he'll probably just beat Martin Buday up. Yeah, I don't know. I think people are getting a little weird with the Buday pick. Buday finished Josh Parisian and Chris Barnett, and that is it. Everybody else he had a split to Lucas Bershke. He had a split to Andrei Arlovsky. I think Arlovsky won that fight. I don't know, man. Seems like he fucking cowered up when Shamil Gaziev put pressure on him, and all Buchecha does is put pressure on guys. Oh, and to continue the Petr Yan Marcus McGhee thing, because that was short, I think Marcus McGhee looks funny. All right, good night, guys.